Michael Jackson, the pop music and dance innovator, passed away yesterday. Jackson appeared to have suffered from cardiac arrest. He was 50 years old.
Janet felt like doing something together was a way to help him out if she could.
Did he ever beat you? Yes, he did. Yes.
At 59, Janet Jackson finally said the quiet part out loud. For decades, fans saw the smiles, the synchronized moves, the perfect family image. But behind that shine was distance, pressure, and silence. She and Michael weren't enemies. They were survivors of the same machine. What the world called perfection, they called survival. Scream wasn't just two icons on a spaceship. It was two siblings trying to talk without words. This isn't a story about fame. It's about love, control, and what happens when family becomes a brand. This is the Jacksons: love, control, and the art of distance. When Scream dropped, it wasn't just another flashy pop video. It was an earthquake. Michael and Janet Jackson, the two biggest siblings in music, finally appeared together on screen again. Everything about it screamed excess. The space-age set, the black and white look, the insane budget. It wasn't just a song, it was a statement. The Jacksons were standing shoulder to shoulder, fighting back against the world that had picked them apart. But the truth was, the whole thing had been tense from the start. Janet later said they barely saw each other while shooting. He worked nights, she worked days, and his team kept them separate. Everything about the project was carefully managed, and not in a warm sibling way. People around them said even the studio sessions happened apart. Rumor had it Michael redid his vocals after hearing hers, just to make sure he stayed on top. That's how fragile it all was. Two legends pretending nothing was off. What looked like a reunion was really a mirror of their distance. The spaceship setting wasn't just futuristic. It was cold, empty, and lonely, just like their relationship at that point. The video was meant to show healing, but it ended up showing how far apart they'd grown.
There was a sense that this is a historic moment in pop culture history, that Janet and Michael are going to do a video together, and they wanted it to be big.
To understand how they got there, you have to go back to Gary, Indiana. The Jackson home wasn't exactly warm and fuzzy. Their dad, Joe, treated the place like a training camp. Every mistake meant punishment, and every bit of affection was tied to performance. Michael grew up terrified of messing up. He once said he felt sick just seeing his dad holding a belt. That kind of fear doesn't disappear. It shapes you. It made him a perfectionist, but also made real connection hard. Janet was the youngest, the one who watched it all unfold before it was her turn. By the time she was ready to step in, her brothers had already built an empire. Michael wasn't just a superstar, he was untouchable. That meant her path was already drawn for her, whether she wanted it or not. She started acting, then singing, managed by her dad like the rest. It didn't feel like freedom, it felt like obligation. She once admitted that carrying the Jackson name was heavy. It opened doors but also locked her into expectations she never asked for. The Jackson house was a factory, and every kid was a product. There was love in there somewhere, but it was buried under ambition and control. Every sibling wanted to be seen. Janet had to prove she wasn't just Michael's little sister, and Michael in turn had to keep proving he was still the one at the top. In their family, love was applause, not affection. And that's what made Scream hit so hard. It wasn't just about the world attacking them. It was about two people raised to perform instead of connect, finally standing next to each other again, pretending that everything was fine.
Janet felt like doing something together was a way to help him out if she could.
By the mid-'80s, they were both stars, but living in completely different worlds. Michael was already orbiting the planet on his own, building an entire fantasy around himself. His music wasn't just music anymore. It was legend status. Every move, every sound, every tiny detail had to be perfect. He turned his whole life into a movie, creating this dreamland where he could finally be the kid he never got to be. But chasing that kind of innocence meant shutting people out, even family. The higher he went, the more isolated he became. Janet went the other way. She started cutting strings, breaking out from under her dad's control, and figuring out who she was without the family name leading the way. When she linked up with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, it all clicked. Her music became sharper, tougher, honest. She wasn't trying to escape the world. She was taking control of her own. While Michael hid behind glass walls, Janet was reaching for connection. Her next projects were bolder, more grown, more real. She talked about social issues, self-expression, and the freedom to own your story. By the time she hit full stride, she turned herself into the voice of independence. Michael was chasing perfection, Janet was chasing truth. He wanted to be untouchable. She wanted to be understood. He built a kingdom that kept everyone out. She built bridges that pulled people in. By the time the Jacksons hit their peak, the family name wasn't just a name anymore. It was a business logo. They'd gone from being a group of siblings to a full-blown empire. Everything they did was about keeping the brand alive. Joe Jackson had turned their living room into a training ground. From day one, it was about profit, exposure, and perfection. Being a Jackson came with expectations. Your choices didn't just affect you, they affected the brand. Every sibling had to play their part in keeping the empire shiny.
Did he ever beat you? Yes, he did. Yes.
On the outside, they kept up the image, smiling for cameras, showing up at award shows, pretending everything was fine. Behind the smiles, though, things were cold. People close to them said the family dynamic ran on PR more than emotion. Even grief had its own script, like when Joe showed up promoting a record label right after Michael's death. For them, business never really stopped. Janet carried that weight in silence. She had massive success, but she couldn't escape the shadow of her last name. She once admitted it felt like something she inherited, not something she chose. Michael's story was a different kind of heartbreak. The bigger he got, the less he trusted anyone, especially the people around him. He felt boxed in by contracts, expectations, and family politics. Everything felt transactional. To the world, the Jacksons looked like this untouchable dynasty, but inside they were worn out from keeping it all together. Then came the chaos. Michael got hit with accusations that tore his image apart. Suddenly, the world stopped seeing him as a person and started treating him like a headline. Cameras followed his every move, and no matter what he did, it was never enough. The scandal didn't end with a settlement, it just fed the circus. Janet was stuck in the middle. She was family, but she was also a brand, and every question about Michael put her in a no-win situation. Speak up, and it could ruin her career. Stay quiet, and people would call her cold. So she said almost nothing, because sometimes silence is the only way to stay standing. They rarely spoke, not out of hate, but exhaustion. Fame had turned them into strangers. Then history repeated itself. During her Super Bowl performance, Janet's career crashed overnight after 1 second on live TV. The world called it Nipplegate, and she was dragged like she'd committed a crime. Meanwhile, Justin walked away untouched. Networks dropped her, radio pulled her songs. It was brutal. She called it overblown, and she was right. The backlash was massive and unfair. What made it worse was the irony. Years earlier, she'd been pressured to defend her brother through scandal. Now she was the one being crucified in public. Michael disappeared from judgment. Janet faced it head-on. Different battles, same punishment. By the late 2000s, whatever was left between Michael and Janet felt fragile. Still love, just hard to show. They weren't fighting, they'd just grown apart in that quiet, painful way where no one really knows how to bridge the gap anymore. Janet still reached out, even when it felt pointless. She'd call, send word through people, show up when she could. But Michael was already in his own world, chasing some version of peace through rehearsals, books, and the idea of a comeback that could finally fix everything. He didn't stop caring. He just didn't know how to let anyone in anymore.
Michael Jackson, the pop music and dance innovator, passed away yesterday. Jackson appeared to have suffered from cardiac arrest. He was 50 years old.
When the news broke that Michael Jackson was gone, the whole world froze. For everyone else, it was the loss of a global icon. For Janet, it was something deeper. The ending of a story that never really got closure. Their relationship had always been a mix of love, distance, and things left unsaid. Now there was no more time to fix any of it. A few days later, she stood on stage at the BET Awards. No theatrics, no tears, just stillness. The world expected this big emotional moment, but Janet did what she always did, kept her pain private. Her few words were calm, her face unreadable. That was her version of grief, quiet, collected, and far from the chaos happening around her. Behind closed doors, things were messy. The family was already fighting over Michael's estate, his will, his legacy. It was business as usual, even in tragedy. While the world lit candles and played his songs on repeat, Janet stayed out of the noise. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was holding on to memories. She once mentioned the last time they saw each other, just days before he passed. They'd spent the day goofing around like kids, laughing, calling each other after. It was the kind of light moment they hadn't had in years. And then it was gone. Years later, she finally took control of her own story. In her documentary, Janet, she peeled back everything, the brand, the mystery, the family rules, and finally said what had been sitting inside her for decades. She talked about growing up under control, the teasing from Michael that stung even when it was meant as a joke, and how their Scream video had hurt because she felt shut out of his world. It wasn't angry, it was honest. That film gave her something the Jackson name rarely allowed: freedom. It showed that what broke them wasn't hate. It was the machine they'd been trapped in since childhood. For once, she got to speak as herself, not as part of a brand. By the time the documentary came out, Janet wasn't bitter anymore. She wasn't trying to rewrite history or fix what couldn't be fixed. She just told the truth. Michael would always be larger than life, a myth to the world. But Janet finally became something he never got the chance to be: real. And in that silence, Janet stood, not as anyone's shadow, not as a symbol, but as the last voice of a family that gave everything to the world, even when it cost them themselves.